Ladies and gentlemen, there exists a silent affliction not often spoken of, an invisible weight carried not on the shoulders, but in the soul. It is the burden of heightened intelligence, and with it, the piercing ache of seeing reality too clearly. While society often praises brilliance, it rarely acknowledges the pain that accompanies the capacity to perceive deeply, to understand profoundly, and to feel the full gravity of existence. Today, we gather not to lament this gift, but to name it, explore it, and perhaps redeem its meaning. To be intelligent is to see the world not merely as it appears, but as it truly is. This seeing goes beyond facts, beyond data collection. It is an intuitive unraveling of the layers beneath experience, a peeling back of the skin of appearances to reveal the sinews and bones of reality itself. The intelligent mind is not satisfied with surfaces. It is drawn toward depth with an almost painful compulsion. While others may find comfort in simplicity, the intelligent are often condemned to complexity, forever parsing what lies beneath the surface of human behavior, social systems, and even their own inner lives. It is not a matter of choice, but of compulsion. The mind that is sharp cannot help but cut. It dissects experience, carving meaning from confusion and clarity from chaos. Even when such clarity brings discomfort rather than relief, this clarity reveals contradictions that the average mind may never notice. One sees the hypocrisy in social norms, the instability in relationships built on illusion, the existential absurdity masked by daily routine. In a world that often survives on unspoken agreements to look away, to ignore the cracks in our institutions, the suffering behind smiling faces, the quiet despair behind hollow optimism, the intelligent individual finds themselves unable to participate in such mutual deception. They see too much to pretend. Their minds have turned toward the deeper layers of truth, and with that vision comes a kind of exile. For the truth is rarely welcomed. It is often inconvenient, destabilizing, or even dangerous. It is not only the world outside that becomes more visible. The intelligent person is forced also to confront the intricacies of their own psyche. They are acutely aware of their internal contradictions, their unconscious drives, their fragmented desires. The ability to reflect deeply, to question one's own motives and responses, is a blessing in the realm of growth, but a torment in the realm of peace. Self-knowledge does not always comfort, it often disturbs, and once the veil has been lifted from one's own inner world, it cannot easily be drawn again. The comfort of unknowing, the sanctuary of unquestioned identity, is forever lost. What makes this especially painful is the lack of reciprocal perception in most human interactions. To see deeply into another, to intuit their fears, projections, and unspoken pain, is a profound and often lonely experience when it is not returned. The intelligent individual may walk through the world like a ghost in reverse, not invisible but hyper-visible, constantly perceiving the unnoticed dynamics that govern conversations and decisions. They may smile at the irony of what is said versus what is meant, or feel the weight of a room shift with a truth no one will speak aloud. And in this constant overseeing, they may begin to feel unseen themselves. This burden is not necessarily tied to formal education or IQ, but rather to a particular quality of consciousness, a tendency toward insight, an attraction to the symbolic, a mind that weaves meaning from subtle threads. It is this quality that causes the intelligent person to find profundity in what others dismiss, to sense depth where others see none, to recognize the patterns behind chaos and the chaos beneath apparent order. But to live in such a heightened state of awareness is to live on a knife's edge. One risks becoming paralyzed by the sheer complexity of life, overwhelmed by the multitude of meanings, unable to act with the innocence that action sometimes requires. To think deeply is to hesitate, to see clearly is to doubt, And doubt, while essential to wisdom, is often a painful companion in a world that rewards certainty and speed. And so, this double-edged quality of intelligence, this capacity to illuminate while also wounding, forms a quiet crucible through which the deeply perceptive must pass again and again. Their minds alight with understanding, yet burdened by all that they cannot unsee. Most live their lives nestled within the comfort of inherited beliefs, absorbed unconsciously through family, culture, and routine, never needing to probe deeper into the architecture of their world. This unconscious way of being is not necessarily shallow. It can be filled with tradition, love, and practical knowledge, but it often floats on the surface of life's depths, insulated from the abyss of existential uncertainty. For many, this insulation is a form of grace, a natural boundary that protects the psyche from unraveling. But for the highly intelligent, this boundary is thin, permeable, sometimes non-existent. The conscious mind awakens early and cannot be lulled back to sleep. It begins to question not just what is done, but why it is done, not just what is believed, but what lies beneath belief. This questioning is not a rebellion for its own sake. It is an involuntary movement, a kind of cognitive gravity that pulls the mind into deeper inquiry in this relentless pursuit of understanding. The intelligent mind becomes a kind of instrument, constantly attuned to contradiction, nuance, and paradox. It senses dissonance in places others feel harmony, and it aches with the friction of unresolved truth. Even moments of supposed clarity are rarely final, for each answer opens more questions, each revelation uncovers new shadows. To be intelligent in this way is to live in a state of perpetual becoming, where certainty dissolves and the self is never fixed but fluid, always being reshaped by new awareness. This fluidity can be a source of tremendous creativity and insight, but it can also be disorienting. The ground beneath the intelligent mind is always shifting, and in that shifting, peace is often elusive because of this heightened awareness. There is rarely a moment when the intelligent individual is not aware of themselves being aware. This meta-consciousness, the constant observation of one's own thoughts, feelings, reactions, becomes both mirror and trap. It allows for deep introspection, self-correction, and growth, but it also fractures the immediacy of experience. The moment never just is, it is also being analyzed, weighed, and contextualized. Joy is felt, yes, but also studied. Sorrow is mourned, but also dissected. The mind does not rest. It hovers above, watching itself live, rarely allowing for surrender to the now. This state of heightened consciousness often isolates. The person who cannot turn off their awareness may find that they no longer share the language of simplicity that once connected them to others. Small talk becomes exhausting, shallow rituals feel hollow, and conversations that dance only on the surface leave the soul hungry. The intelligent may find themselves longing for a kind of connection that few are prepared to offer, a dialogue of depths, an exchange of unvarnished truths, a mutual willingness to see and be seen without pretense. Without such connection, they may begin to retreat, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion, out of the ache that comes from continually seeing through things alone and in solitude. The mind becomes even more active. With no distractions to dilute its force, it turns inward, tracing the labyrinth of its own architecture, confronting not just the external complexities of the world, but the internal contradictions of selfhood. It wrestles with the layered nature of desire, the tension between ideals and instincts, the yearning for transcendence amidst the pull of survival. It begins to see that the self is not a singular, solid entity, but a constellation of parts, some ancient, some wounded, some divine, some animal. And this multiplicity, once seen, cannot be unseen. The illusion of a simple, coherent identity evaporates, and in its place is a vast inner wilderness, full of mystery and sometimes terror, yet also full of potential and depth and truth, all of this the relentless questioning, the inability to rest in inherited answers, the unblinking awareness of one's own mind, amounts to a form of chronic wakefulness, not of the body but of the soul. It is not the kind of wakefulness that comes with caffeine or alarm clocks, but the kind that comes with a deeper kind of seeing, one that refuses to be comforted by easy narratives or lulled by familiar lies. And in this wakeful state, one begins to realize that intelligence, for all its glory, is also a burden that few truly understand or even recognize. To see more is often to speak less, not because there is nothing to say, but because the weight of what could be said grows too heavy to lift into words that will be understood. The person who sees too deeply becomes increasingly aware of the futility of trying to express truths that others are not yet prepared to hear. Communication begins to feel like a translation of soul into a language that cannot quite hold its shape. Every word feels slightly inaccurate, every explanation like a dilution, a compromise between clarity and palatability. So the intelligent often fall silent, not out of pride or detachment, but because the essence of what they perceive resists simplification. There is a kind of loneliness that grows in this space between seeing and saying, where the speaker already anticipates the listener's discomfort, dismissal, or misinterpretation, and gradually begins to preserve their truths in silence rather than scatter them into misunderstanding. There is also the fear, almost always justified, that truth spoken too boldly can fracture fragile social agreements. Society is, in many ways, a web of subtle lies, necessary lies, comforting lies, shared illusions that keep the machinery of interaction running smoothly. The intelligent mind sees through these with painful ease. It sees the contradictions between what is professed and what is done, between image and reality, between public virtue and private desire. To expose these contradictions is not merely to offer insight. It is to threaten the fabric of cohesion that people depend upon to feel safe. This awareness becomes an ethical dilemma, whether to speak and risk alienation, or to remain silent and carry the burden of knowledge alone. The choice is rarely simple. Truth is not a neutral force. It wounds as often as it heals. It can illuminate a path, but it can also destroy the ground beneath someone's feet. This is why the most intelligent often wear masks not of deceit, but of protection. They learn to modulate their expression, to shape their words like stones smoothed in the river of social necessity. They nod at the appropriate time, speak gently where they could speak fiercely, withhold when they could expose. This isn't dishonesty. It is the survival skill of those who dwell too close to the fire of truth. To bear one's full perception without restraint is not brave but reckless in a world not built to handle that kind of brightness. And so they shape themselves into acceptable forms, all while their inner vision remains intact, quietly observing, quietly knowing, quietly grieving what must be left unsaid. This internal dissonance, the distance between what is seen and what can be shared, creates an inner tension, a psychological weight that deepens over time. It is not just a matter of ideas not being heard. It is the experience of one's internal world becoming increasingly untranslatable. One feels like a visitor among people who speak a different language, for whom the sky has fewer stars, whose eyes do not notice the tremble in a voice or the sadness behind a smile. And yet the intelligent person continues to walk among them, navigating conversations that seem increasingly scripted, increasingly thin, increasingly disconnected from the hidden currents of reality they can so easily detect. The pain is not just in the isolation. It is in the recognition that this isolation comes precisely because one cannot unsee what they have seen, they begin to long for a different kind of dialogue. Not just exchange of information, but of essence. A conversation where silence is not emptiness but presence, where words are not used to distract but to reveal, where truth is not feared but invited in, no matter how disruptive. Such exchanges are rare, and when found, are cherished like breath in suffocation. Until then, the intelligent mind often retreats into itself, creating vast inner landscapes where truths can exist unedited, where understanding is not conditional, where the painful gift of vision can at least be held with integrity, if not always with peace. In this retreat, there is no bitterness, only a quiet reverence for the complexity of things and a steady endurance that carries one forward through a world where much must be hidden, softened, or delayed, simply because the light of too much truth burns too hot for most to bear, and so the intelligent continue to carry their vision like a lantern turned inward, illuminating a path that few will walk but many unknowingly benefit from, all while they remain unseen, unspeaking, and profoundly alone in their understanding of what lies beneath the surface of the world they cannot help but perceive. With deeper intelligence often comes deeper empathy, not the superficial kind that mimics politeness or performs compassion for the sake of image, but a raw and penetrating sensitivity to the unseen currents moving through other people's lives. It is a knowing that goes beyond what is spoken, beyond even what is consciously felt by the person being observed. The intelligent empath does not simply imagine another's pain. They become it, absorb it, carry it, often without being invited to do so. They walk into a room and feel the energy hanging in the air before a word is exchanged. They notice the micro-expressions, the subtle inflections in tone, the way someone's laughter holds a tremor of despair. They witness what is not confessed, hear what is not said, and grieve what others are still denying to themselves. This kind of empathy is not a choice. It is an involuntary attunement, a nervous system that refuses to numb itself, a consciousness that remains porous despite every attempt to close the gates. Because of this, the intelligent person often finds themselves deeply affected by the suffering of others, even when it does not directly touch their own life. They feel the anxiety in someone else's posture, the exhaustion behind a friend's carefully curated smile, the quiet panic buried in societal systems that parade as order. They cannot walk past injustice without sensing its reverberations in their own body. They cannot easily compartmentalize tragedy, cannot watch the world burn through a screen without internal combustion. It is not that they are overwhelmed by every sadness. It is that their awareness links one sorrow to another, weaving individual griefs into a broader tapestry of human struggle. They see not only the wound, but its roots. They see how the personal is always tied to the collective, how the pain of one echoes in the pain of many. This vision, while profound, becomes exhausting because there is no off switch, no convenient ignorance to retreat into when the world becomes too much. There is also a tremendous frustration that arises from this empathy. Frustration at being able to perceive what others deny, at seeing solutions ignored, at watching cycles of suffering repeat, because the people inside them cannot or will not recognize the deeper patterns. The intelligent empath often feels helpless in the face of unnecessary pain, not because they lack the ability to help, but because they see that help is often rejected, that truth is often resisted, that people cling to familiar suffering rather than venture into the unknown territory of healing. It is painful to love a world that cannot yet love itself. It is agonizing to care deeply in a system that rewards detachment, profits from distraction, and punishes those who feel too much. Even joy becomes complicated. When the intelligent empath encounters beauty, true soul, stirring beauty, they experience it fully, intensely, almost unbearably. A piece of music, a line of poetry, a quiet act of kindness, all of it hits with the same force as tragedy, because they are wired to feel deeply in every direction. But even in moments of bliss, there is a shadow, a fleeting awareness of how temporary it all is, how fragile, how easily it could vanish. The ability to feel profoundly does not differentiate between pain and joy. It amplifies both, making every emotion echo longer, vibrate deeper, linger more heavily in the body and mind in relationships. This depth of empathy creates both profound connection and constant risk. The intelligent empath can sense the shift in someone's inner world before that person has even identified it. They offer insight, comfort, or silence, whatever the moment requires, but this constant tuning in can become draining when not reciprocated. They often become caretakers of emotional climates, absorbing the turbulence of others while neglecting their own needs. It becomes difficult to know where others end and where they begin, difficult to set boundaries when one's internal compass is calibrated to others' well-being. They do not just witness emotions, they metabolize them, holding space even when they are not asked to, and sometimes losing themselves in the process. This is the hidden toll of intelligence joined with empathy, a quiet, tireless labor carried out behind calm expressions and thoughtful words, a lifelong balancing act between openness and survival, between loving the world and being undone by it, between serving as witness and trying not to drown in everything one is forced to feel without permission or reprieve. The intelligent mind, by its very nature, seeks patterns, systems, meaning. It reaches out constantly into the unknown, assembling fragments of information and experience into a coherent whole that never quite arrives. There is always one more layer to be uncovered, one more thread to follow, one more shadow to name. This restless pursuit can bring extraordinary insight, creativity, and growth, but it also births a kind of existential fatigue, an inner erosion that comes from holding too many questions without answers. The questions themselves are not the burden. It is the depth of commitment to them, the refusal to settle for half-truths, the persistent tug toward the unseeable edge of what is known. The intelligent person lives in this space between clarity and uncertainty, perpetually aware that their understanding, however vast, is always partial, always in motion. The more they learn, the more they become intimate with the vastness of what they do not know, and this intimacy with the unknown does not comfort, it disturbs, provokes, humbles, and sometimes consumes. This relationship with the unknown is not abstract, it is personal. The intelligent person cannot help but turn their gaze inward, applying the same rigor of inquiry to their own psyche. They begin to question the self, not merely in the sense of understanding personality or preference, but in the deeper recognition that the self is not a single, unified thing. They begin to encounter the multiple selves that inhabit their consciousness, the child self, the critical voice, the hidden archetypes, the unlived lives, and each carries its own logic, its own fears, its own desires. The mind that is capable of complex thought turns itself into a mirror, but the reflection it offers is fragmented, layered, and always shifting. Identity becomes a question rather than an answer, a process rather than a possession, and in that realization, the illusion of control begins to dissolve. With this dissolution comes a deep sense of vulnerability. Not weakness, but the raw, unsettling vulnerability of realizing that no structure of thought, no system of belief, no achievement or title can shield one from the ultimate uncertainty of existence. The intelligent person sees through the societal constructs that offer others a sense of stability, career, reputation, even relationships, and recognizes that beneath them all lies the same existential groundlessness. This recognition is not cynical, it is not nihilistic, but it strips away false comfort with such precision that even moments of success or connection are often touched by the awareness of their impermanence. Nothing stays, nothing is ever fully grasped. Everything, including the self, is in flux, and to see this clearly, constantly, without the veil of denial, is both enlightening and deeply disorienting. In this disorientation, there is a temptation to withdraw, not out of disdain, but as a form of self-preservation. The intelligent person may begin to limit their engagement with the outer world, not because they do not care, but because each encounter adds another layer of complexity to an already saturated inner landscape. Their solitude becomes a sanctuary, a place where the noise can subside and the fragments of thought can be gathered, sorted, understood. But even in solitude, the mind does not rest. It continues to turn inward, to question, to dismantle and reconstruct its inner architecture, often spiraling into periods of profound introspection that few around them will ever witness. They smile in public, respond politely, perform the rituals of everyday life, all while carrying within them entire universes of thought, emotion, contradiction, and doubt. And yet, despite this burden, or perhaps because of it, there is also a quiet strength that forms, an integrity that comes from living without illusion. The intelligent person does not seek comfort in false narratives. They choose instead to remain awake, to hold the weight of their awareness with as much grace as they can muster, even when it threatens to crush them. They are not fearless, but they are honest. They are not always at peace, but they are deeply attuned to the pulse of life beneath the chaos, to the quiet truth that meaning is not found but made, and that even in the face of overwhelming complexity, there is something sacred in the act of continuing to search, to see, to carry forward, without guarantee of arrival. So let us not envy those who see too deeply, nor pity them. Let us instead understand that with great vision comes great suffering, and perhaps even greater responsibility. The burden of intelligence is real, but it is not without purpose. It is a calling to walk the edge between knowing and feeling, between clarity and compassion. And in that journey, through the valley of insight and the fire of perception, may we forge not just clever minds, but wise hearts. Thank you.